This is the story of something that happened to me a few years ago, and even now, when I think about it, I get chills. I've never told anyone the full story before, but tonight, I think it's time. It started when I moved into a small apartment by myself. It was nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom unit in an older building. But it was mine, and I liked the idea of living alone. The rent was cheap, and the neighborhood was quiet. At first, everything seemed normal. But then little things started to feel off. The walls were thin. I could hear my neighbor on the other side, an older man named Mr. Levin. He kept to himself. I only saw him once or twice, maybe when we crossed paths in the hallway. He never smiled, never said much. Just nodded and kept walking. I thought he was just shy. But then I started noticing sounds. Not normal sounds like footsteps or music. These were small, soft scraping sounds, like someone moving something slowly against the wall. At first, I figured it was just old pipes or something harmless. But it kept happening, and it always seemed to come from the same spot, right behind the wall in my bedroom. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. I didn't know why at first. Then I heard it again, that scratching sound. But this time, it was louder, closer. I turned on the light and pressed my ear against the wall. I could swear I heard breathing. Not deep snoring or anything, just slow, steady breathing. Like someone was standing on the other side of the wall, waiting. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I went downstairs and asked the landlord if anything weird had happened in my unit before I moved in. He laughed it off, said, "Nah, you just got one of those creepy old buildings. Walls make weird noises. Don't let it get to you." But it did get to me. A few nights later, I was getting ready for bed when I noticed something odd near the outlet in my bedroom wall. The paint looked a little chipped around the edges. I got closer. That's when I saw it. Just above the outlet, there was a tiny hole. Not very big. Maybe the size of a pencil. I leaned in and looked through it, but it was too dark on the other side. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was looking back at me through that hole. I covered it with tape and tried to sleep. But the breathing started again. Only this time, it wasn't behind the wall. It was in my room. I froze. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I stayed completely still, staring into the darkness. Then I heard a creak, like a floorboard shifting. Slowly, I reached for the lamp and turned it on. Nothing. The room was empty. But the next morning, when I peeled the tape off the hole just to see, it was bigger. Not much, but definitely bigger. I was done pretending I was imagining things. I called the landlord again and demanded he come check the wall. He agreed reluctantly and came by later that afternoon with some tools. He tapped around the area, checking the plaster, then pried the outlet cover off. What he found behind it, I'll never forget. There wasn't just a hole. There was a whole network of small tunnels carved between the walls. Thin passageways just wide enough for someone to crawl through. And behind the wall, pointed directly at where my bed had been, was a camera. An old one wired through to somewhere else in the building. The landlord called the police. They searched Mr. Levin's apartment, and what they found was horrifying. Monitors, wires, dozens of tapes labeled with dates and times. He had been watching me, and not just me. The tenant before me and the one before them. Turns out, Mr. Levin was never supposed to be living there. He had once worked maintenance in the building years ago and had made himself a hidden space between units after he got fired. He never really left. They arrested him that night. I moved out the next morning, didn't even bother to pack everything. I couldn't stay there a second longer. Even now, I check every new place I live in. every outlet, every wall. I sleep with the lights on sometimes, and every so often I still feel it, that cold, crawling feeling on the back of my neck. Like someone's watching. This is the story of something that happened to me and my wife when we moved into our first home together. I'm going to tell you exactly how it happened, and I swear every word is true. If you've ever had a bad feeling about a neighbor, this story will stay with you. It was a quiet neighborhood tucked away in a small town. Nothing fancy, just rows of old houses with cracked sidewalks and sleepy trees. Our house was cute, cozy, with peeling paint and a creaky porch, just the way we liked it. But what really made it a good deal was the house next door. It was abandoned. Or at least, that's what the realtor told us. The windows were all boarded up. The grass was tall and wild. There was a padlock on the side door that led to the basement, and the main door had a huge chain across it. Been empty for years, the realtor had said with a shrug. Nobody's lived there since the old man died. For a while, we didn't think much of it. We were too busy unpacking, painting, settling in. But then the sound started. It was always late. Around midnight, sometimes later. At first it was small things, scratching, a faint dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across a concrete floor. Sometimes a soft thump. We figured maybe it was animals, a raccoon or something trapped in the basement next door. But then it started getting louder, more deliberate. One night, my wife shook me awake. Her eyes were wide, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's someone in the basement next door," she said. I listened, and I heard it too. A low, groaning noise. Then, clear as day, footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps pacing back and forth under the ground. We called the police. They came out, shined their flashlights around, jiggled the padlock, and said there's no way anyone's in there. Locks rusted shut, but they didn't check inside. Said they couldn't enter private property without cause. They left, and the sounds came back the next night. Louder. That's when we decided to check it out ourselves. I know, dumb move. But curiosity, it pulls at you, you know. One afternoon, I hopped the fence and went around to the basement door. The padlock looked old, but something felt off. There were fresh scratches around the keyhole, like someone had been using it recently. My heart started pounding. I called my wife over, and we looked at each other like, are we really doing this? I found a crowbar in our garage and wedged it under the lock. It popped open way too easily. The door creaked as it opened, and the smell hit us first. Mold, dampness, but also something else, something sour and metallic, like old blood. I turned on my flashlight, and we started going down the stairs. The basement was huge, way bigger than it looked from outside, and it was filled with stuff, old furniture, broken boxes, rotting clothes. But then we saw the back wall. It wasn't a wall. It was a door, a thick metal one, slightly open. We looked at each other. I didn't want to go any further. Every part of me was screaming to leave. But something in that moment, curiosity, fear, maybe just stupidity, pushed me forward. I opened the door the rest of the way. Inside was a small room. A mattress on the floor, a bucket in the corner, chains bolted to the wall. And in the middle of the room was a chair. And on that chair, tied up and gagged, was a man. His eyes went wide when he saw us. He was alive. We called the police. This time they came fast. Turns out the house wasn't empty. The old man who used to live there had died, yes, but someone had moved in afterward. Quietly. No record, no lease, just squatting. And this person, whoever they were, had been kidnapping people, holding them in that basement, torturing them, maybe worse. The man we found had been missing for almost a year. There were signs there had been others before him. The police never caught the guy who did it. He disappeared without a trace. We moved out 2 days later. Never went back. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear those footsteps in my head. Slow, heavy, right beneath the ground. And I always wonder, is he still out there? Still watching basements, still waiting. This is the story of something that happened to me last year. I haven't told many people about it, mostly because it still feels too strange, too close. But tonight, I'm going to tell you everything. Just promise me you'll listen to the end. It started when I moved into this small rental house just outside the city. Nothing big, just 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and a creaky staircase. It was old, but it had charm. And after a rough breakup, I needed a fresh start. The rent was cheap, the neighborhood was quiet, and I thought, finally, I can just breathe. There was this neighbor across the street. Older guy, gray hair, always wearing this oversized green coat, no matter the weather. He never said much, just stood on his porch and stared. I'd wave, and sometimes he'd nod. That was it. The first sign that something was wrong happened about 2 weeks in. I started noticing food going missing. Not a lot, just little things. A banana here, a yogurt there. At first, I thought I was just forgetting I ate them. But then it kept happening. Bread would be open, peanut butter missing. I lived alone. No one else had a key. Then I started hearing noises at night. It sounded like footsteps, but not from outside, above me. Slow, careful steps, like someone trying not to be heard. I told myself it was just the old house settling. Pipes, maybe raccoons. I even joked about it to my friend over the phone. Maybe I've got a ghost in the attic. But the joke stopped being funny when I found my attic door open one morning. It was one of those square pull-down doors in the ceiling, with a little cord you tug to lower the ladder. I never used it, hadn't even looked up there. But that morning, the ladder was down, just hanging there. I stood there staring at it for a long time, heart pounding, trying to convince myself maybe it fell on its own. I called my landlord. He came by, looked around, went up into the attic with a flashlight. Empty, he said. Just dust and insulation, probably just shifted and dropped on its own. But that didn't explain the food, or the noise, or why I started waking up in the middle of the night with the feeling that someone was watching me. One night, I decided to set up my phone in the kitchen. I left it propped up between some books, recording through the night. I don't know what I expected, maybe a rat, a cat, something. What I saw the next morning made me stop breathing. At around 2:48 a.m., a panel in the ceiling near the pantry slid open. Slowly, a pair of hands appeared. Then a face, dirty, pale, with wide, darting eyes. A man, thin, almost sickly looking, climbed down from my ceiling. He tiptoed into the kitchen, opened the fridge, drank milk straight from the bottle, ate cold chicken with his bare hands. He wiped his mouth on my dish towel. Then he looked straight at the phone for a second, like he sensed it. Then climbed back up and vanished. I called the police right away. They searched the attic. This time, they found a hidden corner, behind the insulation, covered with a black tarp. Inside, a sleeping bag, empty food wrappers, a flashlight, a pair of old binoculars. He'd been living up there for who knows how long, watching me, coming down when I slept. The worst part, they found a small hole in the ceiling above my bedroom, just big enough to see through. The police said he'd been moving from house to house for years, staying just long enough to not be noticed. When they checked the neighbors, one of them mentioned a man who used to live in the neighborhood. A quiet guy, always wearing a green coat, who disappeared months ago. That was him. the man across the street. After he was caught, I moved out the next day. I couldn't stay there. I couldn't sleep in that house, knowing someone had been above me watching. Now wherever I live, the first thing I do is check the attic. Every time. And even if it's empty, I still sleep with one eye open. Because you never know who's living just above you. Watching, waiting. This is the story of something that still makes my skin crawl when I think about it. I'm going to tell you exactly how it happened. And once you hear it, you might start looking at your neighbors a little differently. I know I do. It all started when I moved into a small, quiet neighborhood on the edge of town. The kind of place where people actually wave at each other, kids ride their bikes, and nothing bad ever seems to happen. I had just gotten a new job and wanted a fresh start. The house was small but perfect. The first week was peaceful. That's when I met my neighbor, Mr. Thomas. He seemed nice. Maybe in his late 50s, a little awkward, but friendly enough. Wore these oversized glasses, had always had a cardigan on, even when it was hot. Said he had lived there for years. Told me if I needed anything, just to knock. I thanked him, and we chatted for a few minutes about the weather, the street, harmless stuff like that. Over the next few weeks, I saw him pretty often, watering his plants, taking out his trash, always alone, always polite. But there was something about him I couldn't quite explain. Like he was trying too hard to seem normal. One day, I was walking back from the store when I saw a flyer on the community board outside the grocery store. It caught my eye because there was a familiar face on it. It was Mr. Thomas. Only the flyer didn't say missing or wanted. It said in loving memory of Thomas Hill, 1958 to 2022. I stood there frozen. That was his face. Same glasses, same kind smile. But according to this flyer, he had died a year ago. When I got home, I looked up the obituary online. There it was. Thomas Hill. Died of a heart attack. Used to live on my street. The photo matched exactly. The man I had been talking to, the man who introduced himself as Mr. Thomas, was not supposed to be alive. I didn't know what to think. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe he was a relative who looked like him. I told myself I was being paranoid. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I went over and knocked on his door. He opened it, smiling like always. I asked, casually, "Hey, do you have family that used to live here? I saw someone who looked just like you on a memorial flyer." His smile froze, just for a second. Then he laughed, but it was stiff. Said something about being mistaken for his brother all the time. Said people had even mixed them up when they were kids. I smiled, nodded, and left. But it didn't feel right. So I started watching. Late at night, I'd see the lights in his house flicker on and off at strange hours. Sometimes I'd see shadows moving through the windows, fast, like someone was pacing. And more than once, I noticed his back door open in the middle of the night, just swinging in the wind. Then about a week later, I came home and found a package on my doorstep. No label, no address, just my name. Inside was a photo, an old one, faded. It was of Mr. Thomas, or whoever he really was, standing with another man who looked just like him. Identical, twins, and scribbled on the back were the words, "He took my name. He took my life." I went straight to the police. They opened an investigation. What they found was terrifying. The real Thomas Hill had died, yes, but his twin brother, Daniel Hill, had escaped a psychiatric hospital just 2 weeks after the funeral. He had a long history of violence and identity delusions. They believe he came back, took over his brother's house, and pretended to be him, convincing everyone that he had never died. No one had questioned it. No one looked too closely. Until me. They arrested him 2 nights later. He didn't resist. Just smiled at me as they put him in the car. That same polite, empty smile he always had. I moved out soon after. I still think about it sometimes. How easy it was for him to slip into someone else's life. How close I was to someone pretending, someone dangerous. And the scariest part, he lived just one wall away. This is the story of something I saw with my own eyes. Something I still can't explain, no matter how many times I try. I'm going to tell you everything, and I want you to listen closely, because once you hear it, you'll never look at your neighbors the same way again. It started when I moved into a quiet little neighborhood on the edge of town. I'd just gone through a rough breakup, and I wanted peace. My new house was small, but the backyard was big, with an old wooden fence that separated it from the neighbor's place. I didn't expect much excitement out there, but I was wrong. My neighbor was a woman named Clara. She looked to be in her late 40s, always wore long skirts, and kept her hair tied back tight. She didn't smile much, didn't talk much either. The first time I waved at her from my porch, she looked at me for a second too long, like she was studying me, then gave a slow, stiff nod. That would have been the end of it, just a quiet neighbor, if not for what I started seeing at night. I couldn't sleep well in the new house. Too many creaks, too quiet, you know. One night around 1 a.m., I looked out my bedroom window, which faces the backyard, and I saw her. Clara. She was out in her yard, wearing all black, holding a shovel. She was digging. Slow, careful, like she'd done it 100 times before. I watched as she lowered something into the hole. I couldn't see what it was. It was wrapped in dark cloth, about the size of a shoebox. Then she covered it up, patted the soil down, and went back inside like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep after that. The next night, she did it again. Same time, same quiet digging, another bundle, another hole. Every single night, like clockwork. And every time, it was something small, wrapped up, buried deep. I told myself it was probably weird, but not dangerous. Maybe she was burying old belongings, or ashes, or even some strange ritual thing. People are weird, right? But then I saw her carrying something bigger. One night around 3 a.m., I woke up to the sound of something dragging. I looked out the window, and there she was, pulling a large black garbage bag across the yard. It was heavy. You could tell by the way she struggled to move it. And this time, the hole she dug was much deeper. The next morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked by her house, pretending to take a stroll, and tried to peek over the fence. The fresh soil was still there, dark and soft. Dozens of small patches like that, all over the yard. I didn't want to believe the worst, but I had to know. That night, I waited until she went back inside. Around 3:30 a.m., I grabbed a flashlight and climbed the fence. I picked one of the fresh spots and started digging. It didn't take long before I hit something solid. Wrapped in dark cloth, just like before. I pulled it out, heart racing, hands shaking. When I unwrapped it, I nearly dropped it. It was a doll. Old dirty, its face scratched out, eyes missing. But it wasn't just the doll. Around its neck was a necklace, the same one I'd seen on the missing poster at the grocery store a week ago. A little silver heart. That's when I realized it wasn't just junk she was burying. I called the police, told them everything. They searched her yard. They found 23 buried items. Most were dolls or toys, but some were things that used to belong to real people, hair ties, shoes, scraps of clothing. And in one spot, they found something else. A jawbone, human. Clara was arrested that same night. They said she had a long history of mental illness and had once been a suspect in a string of missing persons cases years ago. but no one had ever proved anything. Until now. She never said a word when they took her away, just stared at me through the fence with those cold, empty eyes, like she knew I'd been watching, like she'd been waiting. I moved not long after that. And now, every time I see someone digging in their yard, I think of her, and I wonder what they're burying when they think no one's watching.